But for this session, I'm going to hand over to Grace and ask Grace to come on stage. Introduce yourself, please, your roles, responsibilities, and your topic. Thank you very much.
Hi, thank you, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Sounds okay, right? Hi, my name is Grace Beeson. I'm with Guidewire Software, and I am the director of GRC there. Prior to being with Guidewire, I worked for a variety of different roles in Hewlett-Packard and EDS, to Hewlett-Packard to DXC, and I ran their global risk and compliance, and I worked with Gavin, who a lot of you heard this morning speak. We're going to be doing a little thing later on as well. So today I want to talk to you about integrated and automated GRC. So I'm super excited to be here with people who are really invested in GRC. Typically when I've done these talks, it's with folks that we've got like our DBAs and our engineers and more technical, or maybe our CISOs. And so what I'm often in a position to do is try to convince them why GRC is important and why do we need to be at the table with them. When I talk about integrated GRC, when I say integrated GRC, what I actually, let me tell you first what we're going to talk about. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how by bringing this together and integrating it and automating it, we're going to build scale. When we build scale, we're going to build efficiency. We're going to look at ways that we can reduce human error, reduce human interaction, reduce duplication. For our C-suites, I'm going to talk to you about how we're going to bring business value to them, because we're going to give them that information that they need to make risk-informed and data-informed decisions. We're going to help them to set priorities that make sense to their business, not just what makes sense to us, because we tend to do that, right? We get into, well, we've got an auditor coming, or what we've got the client says we have to do something, and that's true. It is true. But what we need to do is we need to partner with our executives and with our technical staff and find what their business value is. Why is what we do important? And so often what I say is that in compliance, we're in a role of influence. And we've got to influence by showing business value, not by influence by control. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about how, and I'll talk a little bit in this session, and then I've got a session in about an hour. We'll talk a little bit about how do we scale through automation. Because computers can do things a whole lot faster than people can. And so if we're relying on swivel chair manual processes, we're never going to be able to scale. You're going to be able to do small sample-based questions or assessments or testing. But if you can do it through automation, you can do it in massive amounts. So we're going to talk about those. When I talk with these other groups, often what I have to do is explain to them why it's important. So I talk to you a little bit of why is it important for your C folks. So the other group is your engineers or your DBAs, your architects. Why is what we do important to them? Mostly what they see us as is just a pain, right? Here comes the GRC folks, and oh, they're getting ready for an audit, and they're going to pull me off of this project I'm working on, and I've got to go sit with the auditors. Or here come the GRC folks, and they have an audit, or they've got a customer survey they have to do, and now they want evidence, and I've got this other project I'm trying to work on, but they're wanting me to do this other thing and pull evidence for them. Or we've got an open issue, and here we come asking them, are you on target with your poem? You said that you would have this done in 3 weeks. Where are you? Have you drifted? Are you still going to meet 3 weeks, or is it going to take 6 months? So often when we're working with those technical folks, we're just a problem. We really are, right? We come back and we're a time absorber of things that, and a distraction of things that they have to do. So what I want you to do is look at ways that we're going to work with them to create the automation, because some of it we're not going to do on our own. We're going to need their support. We're going to create some of that automation. But what we're going to do with that is we're going to help them to automate their processes for us. They're going to automate their processes for evidence collection or for issues management or things that we're needing for our audits, so that we can reduce duplication. Oftentimes we have them in multiple systems or multiple applications doing the same thing, putting the same information. So I want to talk to you about how we're going to reduce duplication through automation. And we're going to help them to reduce audit fatigue, because we're going to talk about a way that we can do a test once, use many. And hopefully you've heard that before, but if not, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that. And then for you guys, for the folks in the room that are GRC folks, I'm going to talk to you a little bit why we need to partner with our stakeholders and create business value, because it will also allow us to do more with fewer number of people. And I'm not saying reduce staff. I'm not doing that at all. In fact, I've typically had to grow my teams, but we can do more proportionally with the same number or just a small number of staff extra. We can do much larger scale compliance. So the first thing I want to talk is, if you're in integrated GRC, if you're in one of those organizations where you've got a risk group over here, and you've got a compliance group over here, and you've got a governance team, and maybe they talk to each other, but they're not necessarily all working together, you're set up for failure. Because we are so integrated together, and the things that we do overlap so much, that the best way that you can do that is integrating all of those components into one organization. But equally, you need to be integrated into the company. So sometimes what I see is risk and compliance, or GRC, is an afterthought. I'll tell you a story. So I was with my previous employer, and we had an escalation we were working on. And we were all together in a location working, with whiteboarding and creating solutions. And there was a solution architect that I worked very well with. I had a great relationship with him. And we were going to be there for about a week. And we were there a couple of days, and we were at coffee or whatever, and he said to me, it's great seeing you. I'm glad you're here. And, but, I'm a little confused. Why are you here now? Usually, we talk to you after we've solutioned stuff. Then you come in and you test what we've done. Because that's the problem. If we're not at the table when they're solutioning, they're going to solution to things that are not comprehensive enough. They're going to solution to things that have gaps of areas that we need for our compliance. And we are going to come behind, and in 3 months after they deploy or they set up this new customer service, or in 6 months or in 9 months, we're going to come in, we're going to test their controls, and we're going to find failures. And then for our technical staff, we're going to be a distraction because they're going to have issues that they have to remediate. So rather than working on the next greatest thing that they're working on for our customers, we're going to pull them off and they'll have to go remediate something. For our financial and our executives, we're going to hit their bottom line because they probably didn't cost for those things. So if you bring us to the table, and so I want you, and why I'm talking to you about this, I want you to make sure you're at that table. You need to be involved proactively as they're building solutions so that we can then help them to make sure they're costing appropriately and then building in the solutions proactively. So what I like to say is it's not a G or an R or a C. You bring them all together, it is GRC. And I know that we have Michael here somewhere. I don't know if he's here today. But so we brought them all together for a reason, because we work together. But for me, integrated GRC is not just bringing that team together. It is bringing us together with our organizations and with our stakeholders. The other thing I want to do is I want to make sure that, and you guys probably, hopefully this is going to resonate with you and you will recognize this. We have confusion in terminology. So I hear people saying things like, I need a risk exception. There's no such thing as a risk exception. The risk is either there or it's not. You can't be accepted. You have an exception to a policy, and that policy exception could cause a risk, but it's not a risk exception. The other thing I like to make sure is people understand, and I think most of you guys will, is we have risk assessments. So that's, we're doing our assessments. Risk assessments for me also are not just that big assessment that we do once a year to meet our ISO audit regulations, or the one assessment that we do on a product, maybe even annually on the product. Risk assessments for me come in play when I have a gap, or I have an issue, or I have an audit issue, for example, or I have a vulnerability that needs to be remediated. And you get so far down the line of remediation, and then you say, we're not going to be able to fix that. Or this is the best that we can do. This last portion, we can't do anything more on that. And there will be some person that will talk to some executive that'll say, that owns that book of business, that'll say, that's okay. move forward. I'll accept the risk for the remainder of that. Except we haven't done an assessment of that. So we're blindly accepting risk. So for me, it's really important that on those types of issues management, we'll say, that you're also doing a risk assessment. Because frankly, if I have a vulnerability in a particular application or product that I'm using, and there's no fix available to it, one option is I'm going to get whoever owns that business and is financially responsible, the proper risk owner, and I'm going to get them to say, no, I'm okay with that. I'll accept the risk that maybe that something bad will happen to that application because of that application or because of that vulnerability. But equally, another option, and I'm going to guess that most of you don't hear this happen, we could choose to not use that application or to do something different or to migrate away from it. And most of the time we don't do that. You see it doing it with maybe where I've seen is the Windows versions as they get end of life, then we move up to the next one, and they'll have big projects to migrate from whatever version to the next version that's no longer being supported. So I want to stress that you have to do risk assessments anytime you're doing a risk acceptance. And I will talk later when Gavin accepts, and we're going to talk about maybe you don't do the acceptance at the risk level, we're going to do that at the issue level. And that's really what we're talking about, is you're looking at these individual issues and you're deciding whether or not you have remediated it to the point that you are done, or you've remediated it completely, or you're going to accept it, but you're accepting it at that issue level, right? The risk exists regardless of what we do. And you either decide to mitigate and remediate, or you don't, and you take a chance that something bad's going to happen. The other one that I've been starting to use a Guidewire. So we're building out our risk management program. When I joined Guidewire, we did not have a robust GRC program. It had only been about 3 years old. It's a software company, and they had decided to go as a SaaS about 2 or 3 years prior to my joining Guidewire. And so they had an InfoSec team and a GRC team, and we had all the nuts and bolts of what we needed, but we needed to bring that up to the next level. One of the things we didn't really have was a robust risk management program. So we've been building that out. And one of the things that I find is that we have risks that we have SLAs. Let's say, I'm not going to say risk, I'm going to say vulnerability. We have vulnerabilities that we have SLAs, and we're going to remediate those vulnerabilities in X number of days, depending on the criticality. And we go past that. And so there is a risk associated not only with the vulnerability that's there, the millisecond the vulnerability is there, right? Then a threat actor can come in and exploit that vulnerability as soon as it's available. But it gets the likelihood of that being exploited gets higher or more likely the longer that it's out there. The more likely somebody's going to find it. And so what we've taken is that we do a risk assessment and acceptance when we can extend the period of time when a vulnerability is available. An example I use on that is Log4j. Right, so Log4j, most companies, everybody stopped what they were doing, and everybody went straight on to go fix whatever, either they had a problem that they knew about or there was a potential problem. But most of our engineering staff and technical staff went off and went and fixed that and fixed those gaps. So that was something that was decided that we're not going to take the chance on that. We're not accepting the risk on that. We're going to go remediate that quickly. Conversely, we have others that take very long periods of time to fix. And so somebody needs to acknowledge that there is a risk for allowing that to exist, and they accept that risk. So we've started calling those risk extensions. I know it's not a real industry term, but we've started calling extensions because for me it means we haven't just risk accepted and we're walking away and saying, okay, there's a risk, we acknowledge it and I'll own that, but I'm not going to do anything about it. These are ones that we have plans of actions. We're working on them, but it's just going to take a prolonged period of time. And what we're accepting on that is that we're not going to dump all our staff onto fixing it immediately. We're going to extend that period of time. So those are just some of the terms. I find that when I'm doing these talks, I like people to understand that we're doing this talk on the same level of conversation. So GRC for me is a continuum. My team, and I'm very lucky, I do have the full, robust team for what I see. My team goes everything from this. We start with our policies and controls. We look at whatever regulatory frameworks we're required to comply with based on whatever industries we're in, based on whatever regions we're in. We look at our customer requirements. So we start with our policies and frameworks and we start with our controls and frameworks. We write our policies. We then train on the policies. So I actually have the training and awareness sits with me. So we train on those policies, and then we test on those policies, or we test the effectiveness of our controls. From there, we do some kind of governance or issues management, and we remediate those proactively, ideally. My team also includes our vendor risk management and our business continuity management. That business continuity management is kind of a weird one. And then ultimately we get to the other end, which is our third-party audits, and that includes our audits like our ISO, our SOC, our PCI, as well as our customer audits. So for me, it's a continuum, but it's also circular, because we're going to just keep going back to that. So when you're looking at how you're bringing your GRC together, you may or may not have the influence within your organization to bring it all into one team, but if you can't, please then at least make sure that you're matrixed together and you're working together very collaboratively, because all of those parts are parts that are going to intertwine. So I have a Venn diagram, because when you look at it, you look at where governance and compliance overlap, and that's where we're going to find our common and systemic problems. When we find common and systemic issues or gaps, rather than one-offing and going and talking to each individual group and repeatedly doing the same thing over and over again, we can work with our business leaders to create common and systemic resolution. And then you fix it across your scale, and you fix it across your enterprise. When we look at the overlap between compliance and risk management, we're looking at our risk appetite, we're looking at our exception process. And then when we look at, we're looking at your assessments and your exception process, and we look at risk management and governance, then we're talking about that risk appetite. Where's our thresholds? Where are we comfortable in being in tolerance with our risks? The one other thing that I want to say on the risk assessments, this is a big one, and hopefully you guys will see it as well, is the other thing I think is really funny is that we get risk acceptances. We get that form, right? There's this mysterious form that somebody signs, some risk owner signs it, and they say, okay, I accept that risk. And somehow, mysteriously, we think that's it, right? So, but when the threat actor is knocking on our door, I can't hold up that piece of paper and say, sorry, you got to go away. My VP of engineering accepted that risk. So, sorry, you can't infiltrate us. So I think it's important that we understand and we're communicating with our business partners that while we're doing risk acceptance or whatever process you have for that, it doesn't make it go away. The other thing that's close to that is that same thing I was talking about the SLAs, is there is also a difference between compliance and risk. We can be compliant with that SLA. We can have 30 days to remediate that vulnerability. But again, the risk still exists there that you could get exploited. And so again, you've got to be clear that when I'm working with my teams, they'll say, well, but I've got 30 more days to get that done. I go, that's great, but what are we doing to make sure that we're not going to have some kind of exploit on that? And how are we bringing that together? Because I can't say to this threat actor when they come, I've got 30 more days. If you come back, give me 29 more days, or 30 more days, and then you can come back, and then you can infiltrate us then. Well, we can't do that. So there's a difference. So we can be compliant with our own processes and policies and still have some kind of risk available for us. So I talked a little bit about this around partnering with your business partners. The important thing here is that we're using the information that we have to help them make business-informed decisions. So we have all kinds of data. We collect all kinds of information. So whether you're using a GRC tool, well, we're at MetricStream, right? So we'll say with MetricStream, we happen to be using MetricStream at Guidewire. So if you're using some kind of tool, that's fantastic because you're gonna have all this information in one place and then you can run all this data. It's important to, rather than having theoretical discussions, when you're using the data to demonstrate why you have a problem in a particular area, and oh, by the way, I like the color red on my graphs. My executives don't like the color red on my graphs, but I like the color red on my graphs because red on my graphs gets action. So I was talking to somebody the other day and we were talking about how we do extensions on our poems, on our issues management. And I was saying, one of the things we've implemented is that we give you 2 extensions. So life happens, you thought you'd get it done in 3 weeks, it's taking 6, we'll give you an extension on that. We'll let that happen twice. Beyond that, it's just late. And that's okay. It just means that the data that I'm going to give the leadership, it's going to show that it's late. But that also helps them to set their priorities because the VPs, when they're looking at something, especially if you have graphs that have comparisons of business units, they don't like seeing a lot of red compared to in their number compared to their peers. So that's where you get the action. So that's how I use a top-down process. Is I will bring aggregated data at a very high level to my business leaders and the executives. I also use a bottom-up process because they're not going to actually action that. So then I need that more granular data or more granular information that I can actually bring to the DBAs or the engineers and say, these are the things that you need to get fixed and let's work together on the timelines on those and how are you going to get the fix. Because definitely need those fixed before your next audit, per se, let's say. So I use that bottom up, but what I find is that when I go with just the bottom up approach and I'm bringing just that data, what I'll get is I didn't get a chance to work on that today. I had this client thing, and then there was this fire thing going on over this with this other client, but I know that's really important, and I'm gonna get to it tomorrow. I put it on my agenda definitely tomorrow. The problem is tomorrow becomes tomorrow becomes tomorrow. So unless you're partnering with them and you've got the support from your top down to help them set their priorities, and I'm not saying ignore your customers, you have to be able to figure out how they work all that in together. So when we're partnering with our business leaders, we're working together so we need to understand what their business priorities are. Well, customers are gonna be one of the first things, right? We know that. But we also need to understand that they've got a go live with the product, right? And so they have deadlines that they're trying to meet. So we gotta work together and show them where the value is of why do they need to do what we want them to do. Well, and this happened to me recently too. I had somebody say, well, I know we've got this audit coming up and I know you need my engineers to be in the calls, but like we've got customer stuff going on. And so unless it's customer facing, it's not gonna be a priority. And I said, well, when we fill that audit, it's gonna be pretty customer facing because we've got a lot of SLAs and a lot of contracts that say we're gonna get that PCI compliance, for example. So helping them to understand that what we do is not just an afterthought. We're not here just because we feel like being here, we think it's a fun thing to do. We're here because we do have business value. So we need to work with them to understand why is that important. Okay, so let's talk about how we're gonna scale it through automation. I don't know how much time I have. I'm almost at. So let's see how we're gonna work on scaling through automation. So I'll tell a little bit more in my next presentation. I'm going to talk a little bit more. But when I'm talking about automation, I'm talking about automation internal to whatever tools you're using, and hopefully you're using some kind of platform. And if you're here at the MetricStream one, hopefully you're using MetricStream. So hopefully you're using some kind of platform to bring all of that together. But I want automation within the tool. I want the tool talking to itself. If I'm filling in a field around a reason for an issue, and then I'm gonna have that issue related to some risk or whatever, I don't wanna have to fill out who the owner is and what the business unit is and when the date is that it's due. I've already done that. I wanna do that once and let the tool talk to itself. And I've done that. I've worked with MetricStream, and so we have some automation within our tool where we have different components of the platform talking to each other. Because when we do it, I want efficiency with my own team too. But then equally, I want automation external to the tool. So where we've done that, I heard a lot of people talking about, that's the up and coming thing. I'll tell you that we did it, Gavin and I are talking about a little bit, we did it a little over 5-7 years ago. and through automation external with our services. So I had a compliance group running an infrastructure compliance tool on about 500,000 servers every month. And we were looking at the outputs of that. And then we would manually put that into our GRC tool. And so through automation, through an API, and when I did this, I actually didn't even know what an API was. I just talked to my two teams and said, okay, you seem to be talking to each other, doing the same thing, you're testing the same controls, can we just make that talk to itself? And so when we brought that API integration in, what we did is we brought, I'm actually moving into my next slide for a second because I just want to show you what it looked like. We brought information coming in from our external sources into our GRC tool, but then we were equally able to then feed information back out from our GRC tool back out. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in our next presentation. But the point that I want to make around the tooling is that one of the things we hear is, well, we don't have time for that. You know, GRC, we don't often get a huge budget. You know, we're not the first group to get all that funding. So when we're looking at these tools, we look at is how do we create efficiency with them versus spreadsheets and PowerPoints and Word documents and Confluence pages and things that are scattered kind of throughout the whole organization. And when we don't have something that's bringing that all together through automation, we have duplication. We have multiple teams doing the same thing, and they're overlapping. They're not talking to each other. We have policies or controls that might be out in Word documents, let's say, or PDF on a Confluence page, and nobody knows where to find them, or they're not easily searched. And so what we need to, again, we're going back to those business leaders, when we're talking about these things and why are they important, we need to explain how we create efficiencies and how we will create financial, have resources that are available to do other things, so we create some financial advantages by using these things. The other thing that we do with the tools is I like to use them, and I was talking about the compliance, and I'll talk a little bit more later, is I use them for proactive compliance as well. So the other thing is that if you're just relying on your auditors to tell you your compliance posture, you're setting yourself up to fail. One of the things, I don't know if it translates as much over here, but in the US, we have a saying which says, a lawyer never goes to court without knowing the answer to the question that they're going to, never ask a question in court without knowing the answer to it. And so for us, we should never go into an audit without knowing what our security posture is. We shouldn't be relying on our auditors to tell us if we're compliant or not. We need to proactively be testing our controls. And you can do that through manual processes or manual assessments or audits, or you can do it through automation. But however you're doing it, you need to bring it together, and you need to be looking at that information proactively. When you have the tools available to do it, and you can do it through automation, you can do that on scale. If you're going to do it through manual processes and swivel chair, and you might be able to do sample-based, but you're not going to be able to do very large enterprise-wide. The other thing that when we have the tooling available for us is that we're able to then do a test once used many. So in those same compliance, we're able to look at the overlap in our competing regulations and controls. So we've got, if we look at our controls, like we have PCI and we've got GDPR and we've got ISO standards, and a lot of times when we look at those, they're overlapping. So when we do this through automation, we can do a test once and then use that multiple times over because our tool will help us to look at that overlap in those controls. I'm being given the warning, so I'm going to wrap up now. The most important thing that I can say, so coming off of Gavin, so normally I do this, he's not here when I do it, but I do like to steal his last thought, which is start with what you do know, build on what you could know, aspire to what you should know. What I like to end with is start with some automation. If you have just something you can do, move off of the spreadsheets into some kind of GRC tool, or move in from a GRC tool, move into it so that you're using multiple platforms so you can do the integration within the tool, or start bringing things in through automation, through APIs. start small, and then just build on scale. Thank you for your time. I don't think we have any time for questions. I'm out. Thank you.